Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us in this live stream webcast. We're going to be talking about 3 essential tips for aspiring intellectuals. I'm Elan Journo, a writer and speaker here at the Ayn Rand Institute. I'm also a leader of the policy group.
I'm Onkar Ghate. I'm a senior fellow here at the Ayn Rand Institute, and I do a lot of our teaching in the Objectivist Academic Center.
We're really excited to be here today, and thank you all in advance of the presentation and our answers to them. But we got a lot of good questions, and we're excited to cover some of those today. So here's a word about the plan for our presentation. We're going to cover each of the 3 tips in turn, and we're going to intersperse some of the questions we received that seem germane to each of the topics we think worth touching on. So the plan is we'll give you a tip or a piece of advice, and then we'll cover a question related to that and go back and forth that way. All right, so let's begin. The first piece of advice, tip number 1, be curious. And there's a lot behind what that really stands for. That's a shorthand way of saying intellectual work really involves understanding first and foremost, and then explaining and communicating. And in order to provide an analysis and help people evaluate an issue and form your own view to begin with, you need to have broad-based knowledge and deep knowledge of the specific issue you're interested in. And this is in contrast to a view I've heard someone raise, I can't remember who it was, but someone whose work I admired, and he said, when I was 16, I think he was a literary critic, he said, when I was 16, I read 6 shelves worth of books. That constituted my intellectual capital, and ever since then, that's what I've been trading on. And my view is that that is wrong. You can't view your growth and your knowledge as something that you store up and then ride and coast on. It should be something you continually grow and cultivate, and fueled by your genuine curiosity and understanding what's going on. And I'll give you one example of how this is really significant. So suppose you're thinking about the situation with Iran. One of the major questions on the table is what kind of sanctions, if any, and what sanctions can and cannot do. How effective can they be in this context? And as you might know, there are already a number of sanctions in place. How are you going to evaluate that, absent a knowledge of when the first sanctions went into place, what they did, how they were undercut by certain political motivations? There's a long backstory prior to these headlines that you read about. Without knowing those, there's really no way to judge and evaluate properly and form a view. So this is just an example of a way in which depth of knowledge is relevant. But then just thinking about the sanctions on Iran, where have they been reputedly effective? In what countries? So going broader, are there cases where people can point to and say, yes, this actually worked? So the bottom line is you need to be curious and really understand that your knowledge cannot be static. It has to be continually grown and developed over time.
Yeah, and I would add, to be curious really means to be curious about the subject, the set of issues, a set of questions that you want to explore, discover, and eventually find an answer to. So I remember when I was starting off on an intellectual career, I got interested in 2 subjects. I got interested in philosophy, I got interested in economics. And it involved reading, and reading a lot of different authors. Certainly I read Ayn Rand fairly early on, but a host of philosophers, a host of different economic views. I went on to study these in school, and it was, again, I'm interested in the whole field, the Keynes's viewpoint in economics, the more mainstream monetarist economics, Austrian economics, and you're reading widely to figure out there's issues here, there's questions. I'm trying to figure out what the answers are. And it's not, well, I've been handed the answers by Ayn Rand, what else is there to do? Then you're not really curious about the subject, about the field, and you have to then really wonder, do I want an intellectual career if I'm not curious about discovering all the things that you could discover in such a career?
Yeah, and I would wrap up this tip, so be curious, and the action implication, one of them, an important one, is to read, and read widely, and read deeply, and reflect on what you read. So I thought we'd take a question now that fits with this. I forget exactly who submitted this, but the gist of the question is, what are some specific key issues or policies that would be most likely to produce a real sense of progress and change and advancement for Ayn Rand's ideas in the culture, in daily life and in practice? This is a question we think about a lot. It affects the way we plan our work, the priorities we set. And I'm just going to give you a few examples, and the following are not meant to be exhaustive. This is just the tip of the iceberg. Economic freedom, law, the regulatory state. You can think of those as a unity in a certain way. There's a great deal of progress that could be made if some of those debates were reshaped and rational ideas brought into it. And just the idea that what matters fundamentally in that context is the issue of individual rights, as opposed to serving the so-called public good, which is the way those issues are framed. Foreign policy, there I work a lot in. What if we had a foreign policy that truly understood what it meant to advance America's interests and protect our security, as opposed to going abroad and becoming a welfare organization or entering into wars that are needless and so forth? Just to run through some others, one that I think we as an organization think is really important and we'd like to do more in is education policy, and specifically liberating education, making it a free market phenomenon. And there's a lot to say about why that's important if you think about the role of education in a culture. Now imagine what it would look like if it were in a free market context. Environmentalism is a huge issue that needs to be addressed. Healthcare policy, free speech. Now, free speech is one Ayn Rand herself commented on along with others, so she talked about antitrust as a significant priority. Free speech, well, what happens to organizations like ours who have an ideological mission? If there is no free speech, there just isn't the possibility to advocate for the ideas you value. And it may not be obvious from reading the news, but free speech is under assault in many, many different ways that are insidious, and there's an enormous value in upholding freedom of speech in today's culture. So on any number of these, I think making real progress could have a game-changing effect.
And on all of those, objectivism and Ayn Rand's philosophy have a lot to say and a lot that's distinctive. You take the first set of issues that Elan brought up, the economic policy, the regulatory state, law. Well, the whole concept of what is proper law, I mean, the way Ayn Rand frames the issue is what is objective law, and she has a tremendous amount to say about that at a theoretical level. And policy work then is applying some of those ideas to our current legal system and trying to point it in a better direction. The same on economic policy. I mean, she has a very radical view and a radical way of framing the whole issue. She advocates a separation of economics and state in the same way and for the same reasons, as she says, as a separation of church and state that was created at the foundation of the US. You can take environmentalism. There are many distinctive things about what the whole movement is about, what its goals are, why she classified, Ayn Rand classified it as anti-man, and there's a whole theoretical framework that goes into that. But the policy work is then making those ideas part of the debate, part of when environmental issues are debated. Well, are we going to end this dam, not have this kind of construction? That you bring out the wider kind of theory and motivation for the whole movement, and that's what policy work looks like. But in all these, you bring or can bring a very distinctive objectivist perspective to them.
Why don't we turn to tip number 2, which I think you'll tell us about.
So tip number 2. First was be curious. Second is be experimental. So if you're curious about these kinds of issues and thinking of this as a career, there's really no substitute to trying to get your feet wet. So you can try to imagine what a career would be like if you were embarked on it. But the best thing to really get a sense, if you're starting to really think, yeah, this would be the profession for me, or this an intellectual profession, this is the kind of work that I want to do, is try to get your feet wet, try to explore it and become actively involved in it. And the Junior Fellow program that we've created here and that Elan is running is designed exactly for this purpose, that you come to the Institute for up to 1 year and get involved in the kind of work, some of the research, some writing, and a set of other communication talks, so this kind of set of activities that you would do as a professional intellectual to get a sense, okay, this is what the work looks like. This is my current set of skills. There's a whole host that I could develop. Is this the kind of career that I would want? But to get some experience at trying to do it, if you're really thinking about this as a career, I think there's no substitute for that. And it's sometimes hard to just think, well, what if you're an intellectual, what do you actually do? Day to day, you might say, well, you write a book, but what does the activity of writing and research really look like, feel like? Is it something that you would enjoy doing day to day? And there's really no substitute to trying to experiment and get some active experience in the field.
Yeah, and I would add, so if you're thinking about a career, you will get similar advice about law. So there's a huge investment if you want to go to law school, and I think for people who want to do that, that's a necessary step. Oftentimes, it's really valuable just to intern at a law firm and see, well, what is it like? What is a day-to-day activity like? Better yet, if you can do some of the work yourself in another field or where you have the expertise to do so, that is invaluable. There's no substitute for first-hand knowledge. And that was my experience too.
Yeah, and particularly when it's something that takes a lot of education, so that you have something similar in medicine, or you have the kind of internships and so on, because you need to get a sense of this is what it would be like, and what kind of skills I would have to master in order to be part of this profession.
So you mentioned the Junior Fellows program. We'll say a bit more about that later on in the webcast, but we have a question here that I think fits with this tip about being experimental, and the question is, the gist is it possible to maintain one's current career, or I guess you could be studying, and do that full time and be part of the program?
And it might be possible, but I think what's relevant to think of is the program really is meant as its full-time work. You come to the institute, you get a salary, and you have work, and we have a lot of work that needs to be done. So it's not as though it's 4 hours a day and 4 hours of the day you can be on the internet or something like that. So it is a real commitment, and the whole idea is to give you a sense of what this would be like as a career. So you're trying to really be immersed in and have a lot of work. So it might be possible, I would put it more like, is it compatible with another career? If you're thinking of changing careers, it might be possible to take a year off, in effect, but between jobs or something like this, and I want to explore this as because I'm thinking about changing career direction, and you might decide, you might get involved in the program and decide, no, this really isn't the kind of work for me, and you go back to your existing career, maybe a new job or what have you. But I would think that is the more what is in the realm of the possible.
Yeah, and I would say one consideration we had in designing the program is we wanted it to be low risk for the person who's coming in. And so if you're in between jobs, or you're just graduated, you're thinking about it, taking a year off, it's a different proposition to come here for up to a year and try something. It's I think a sensible kind of risk to take, as opposed to taking off 5 years as a challenge to try to see if this is for you. And I think that's the way we like it too. We want people to be immersed in the activities, but we want to see that it's a fit for them too, and how motivated they are to do it. All right, let's move on to tip number 3, and this is the way you phrased it, not the way I phrased it. But go ahead.
I put it as, so we had be curious, be experimental, and third, be ready to fail. The career of an intellectual is you're trying to research, explore ideas, as I put it before, a set of issues and questions that you want to get answers to. It's not easy to get answers to those questions. If they're really real questions, if you understand why there's a debate about the issue, it's because it's not easy to figure out what the right answer is. And then even when you get to the stage of thinking, yeah, I now know what the answer to this question, or what my view is on this issue, and I'm convinced of it, then to try to communicate it to other people and to convince other people that you're right and they're going wrong in various ways is also a difficult task. And a difficult task, you have to be ready to fail. It's like if you're learning a sport, if you're trying to learn to play golf, you're going to shank a lot of shots, hit them into the water, into the bunker, until you learn and you slowly get better and better. And an intellectual career is like that. And there can be a tendency to think that the issue's easy, when you don't really yet understand the issue, the set of questions that are being addressed, particularly for people who read Ayn Rand, because she's a very powerful writer, she's really smart, and she's convincing, but it's easy to take over her answers without really having to digest them, and for them to be answers for you, really your view that you can articulate the reasons and evidence for. So it's easy to make too quick a jump from I've read Ayn Rand to I know all the answers. I mean, it's way too easy to do that. And what you will discover often is if you meet a real opponent who's versed in the field, he can bring up all kinds of issues and questions that you can't answer. And that's not because necessarily, it can sometimes happen because he's just trying to trick you up. But often it's just because he's thought more deeply about the issue than you have. And you shouldn't be trying to attack the other person, but rather recognize, yeah, I need to discover, explore, think more about this issue. And the same happens in communication, that it will often be, one can think kind of as a knee-jerk reaction. They didn't understand my argument because they're stupid. And it's usually the case, and you learn this, I'm a teacher for instance, you learn this as a teacher. If the class doesn't understand the issue, it's almost always because I'm not explaining it well, not because the class just can't get it, they're just not smart enough. So in effect, when you get this kind of discord, you should think it's not them, it's me. So there's failure involved, but any really interesting career that requires ambition is going to have failure. And it's not a bug, but a feature of it.
Yeah, I would share my experience is that there's real value in recognizing that you haven't succeeded. So it's great, you should be oriented towards success, but knowing that you failed is an opportunity to figure out how to do it better. And in my time working with you, there are a number of projects where what you said to me is this doesn't work. Go try again, try this, try that. There's a real way to solve it, but you have to figure out how to do that. And it makes the challenge, so the first reaction, the emotional knee-jerk reaction is, oh, you're crestfallen, but the reaction that is good to have once you consider it is to realize, well, now I'm going to get to learn how to do this even better than I thought, and it raises your own standards for what your work can do. It makes you more effective in advancing what you are trying to communicate. And I mean, I used to have a folder of things where there were projects I decided not to pursue. I killed them myself. And being able to have that view of, I don't really get this. I need to think about it maybe next year once I've done a great deal more reading. And just being self-critical in that respect and recognizing that being self-critical can be a step towards growth. I think that's inherent in having a positive perspective on this kind of career.
Yeah, definitely. So we had a question now that follows sort of in the vein of this third tip of be ready to fail. And the question was, I'll read a part of it. In my experience, it appears that the most effective way to frame the argument for capitalism and rational self-interest is in personal, emotional, and deeply contextual perspectives. And then skipping a little bit, how can intellectual activism from an institutional framework support this mode of persuasion more effectively? And this really goes on the issue of communication. And there really is an issue of, so to make it personal, emotional, you're trying to connect with the audience. Often a connection to make with the audience is you tell from your personal life, just as we've been doing now in terms of a career, and we failed in career, and what you do on a particular project, you fail, it's a learning experience. So when you talk about from your first-hand experience, it has more credibility because it's your first-hand experience. Now, I don't think that is all that is required in communication, but there definitely is an issue of making it personal because then you're connecting it to your observations of the world and life, and you're thinking about that. And to make it emotional means really to do it validly. Like you can improperly play on your audience's emotions. But to do it validly, you're trying to connect to their values, and you're trying to convince them that the issue you're talking about, the argument you're advancing, the solution you're proposing matters, that it will advance something good, that will help them achieve values that they're interested in. And that, if you're able to do that, they will listen because they care about the issue. So, but this you learn, and there's many ways you can do this, and I don't think this is all there is to communication. But it is that this is part of what one is trying to do, and there's a lot of trial and error. I mean, you test various things, and then, no, that actually didn't connect with the audience. They don't seem to care at all about the way I've set up this issue, set up the problem, the examples I gave, and you need to rethink that. So the institutional frame, so it's a question of how can this be adopted in an institutional framework. I think any organization, including the Institute, the Ayn Rand Institute, has to think about not just what they're communicating, but how they're doing it, the tone, the mode of presentation, and so on. And that should be part, and it certainly is for ARI, part of the institutional framework, something that people in the organization, we think about daily.
Yeah, I mean, I would add that in our program, in the OAC, the Objectivist Academic Center, and the Junior Fellows program, both, since they're very closely connected, one thing we try to do is continually test things and tweak them and see what happens. So when I teach a class in the OAC, I'm curious what the students take away, and I think about, well, how effective was that? And sometimes it's not as effective as I would like it to be, and they tell me, and that's a good thing to find out. But I think it's part of developing these skills to realize that maybe this happens once in a million years, but somebody is born fully competent, fully skilled. Skills take practice, and that requires a certain context, and you obviously want to minimize the risk of serious problems, but it's important to try things and learn from the experience.
And that's part of what's fun about the work.
I mean, the number of times I've given public speeches in different fora, so college campuses and other places with different audiences, and it's interesting the questions you get, because the questions are often the most telling signal of how effectively you've communicated. And I get that in the classes we give, and also in the workshops we do with staff. You give the example of, most times it's not the students, it's you, and that is a good premise to have. It makes you attuned to opportunities to see the dissonance between what you thought you were communicating or trying to explain and what actually came across. Good. Well, I think we've covered the 3 tips, so let's just recap those. There's be curious and grow your knowledge. Be experimental and be ready to fail, and recognize the inherent and attractive challenge of doing this kind of work. So I want to transition to a different topic. So we've mentioned a couple of times the Junior Fellows program. I want to say a few words about that, and then we got some questions about the program, which I'll try to address as we go ahead. So what is the program? Well, we've mentioned a few aspects of it, and let me give you in a nutshell. You might have already read a little bit about the program, having joined the webcast, so this assumes a little bit of familiarity, and then I'll leave you with a place to find more. But the gist of it is it's a paid fellowship where you come and join our staff and the policy team for up to a year, and you actually do policy work. You do research, you do writing. There's long-term projects, there are short-term projects, there are daily deadlines, weekly, monthly. We bring you into our team, and we give you responsibility for creating work and for supporting existing projects. And it gives you two important things, among others. One is the actual experience of day-to-day thinking about certain issues, growing your knowledge of those issues, and understanding Ayn Rand's ideas and how they apply in those given contexts. And you get to experience, is this the career for me? I mean, we're really looking for people who are motivated but want to discover firsthand if it's a fit for them. So you get immersion in the kind of issues that we deal with and in how to apply Ayn Rand's ideas to those issues. And then on the other side of it, there's a series of workshops and individualized training that we give depending on who's in the cohort. So it really has to vary based on that. And that covers the key skills. It covers writing, speaking, thinking, and then there's a host of sub-issues that we put under those. And as I said earlier, it meshes with the Objectivist Academic Centers. It's the same faculty. We cover a lot of the same ground, and some people take the two simultaneously. Some people are graduates of the Objectivist Academic Center. Both are welcome. And the real value here is for the participants to find out if this is a career for them, and for us to find out if they really want to do this work. So ideally, some of them do, and we find a way to bring them on staff, but maybe not, and that's fine. There's no expectation or commitment in doing it, and that's part of the proposition. You get a finite time commitment, and that's it.
So maybe you can give one example of a project one of our junior fellows this year worked on, just to give people an idea of this is what it looks like in the concrete.
Sure, I'll give you two,
okay.
just for fun. One big, one small. One several months long project was a white paper. It's still in production. It's almost done. Looking at environmentalism from the perspective of the debate over pesticides, and particularly DDT, which is a much maligned chemical that is used to eradicate malaria around the world. And there's a real question about the data on this, on DDT, and the effects of it. So the argument is it's poisonous, but in fact that isn't well supported by the literature. And in fact it helps save millions and millions of lives by eradicating malaria. So the question is, what can you say about the movement that pushes for banning DDT based on the fact that it actually saves lives and doesn't seem to harm any human life? So there's a real, and implications follow from that in terms of what you should do about it. So that's one example. Another example is, so that was a more individual-led project. Another one is in support of an existing project. So one of my areas of research is the Arab-Israeli conflict. And I've done a lot of research, but it helps to have people come and look through the timelines and help fill in the sources and help catalog a lot of the events that become a useful reference in terms of writing and research. So those are two kinds of examples. One is more in support of a project, one is more led by the individual. And there's a lot more that people do in the program.
Yeah, that gives them some idea.
Yeah. So we got a couple of questions. So let me take this one first. What makes the Junior Fellows Program distinctive, and this is in contrast to other internships or fellowships that people might have heard about? Well, it's not an internship. It's a real job, real commitments, real deadlines, and you're evaluated every quarter based on how you do.
And real money.
Yeah, and real money. It's a real job. So it's in a different category from an internship, although I know there are internships that are paid.
Yeah, some are paid.
It's full-time. It's for up to a year. And I would say that you need a minimum of a bachelor's degree to join. That's part of the requirements. And so a lot of internships are for people during college. So we expect people to have finished at least one degree. The other part of this is the time period. Although there are long internships, this one is up to a year. So this is a difference. And let me cap it off with what I think is the most distinctive aspect, which is there are lots of policy-oriented internships and opportunities. Some of them might even have these same characteristics of length and pay and so forth. But this is the only one that I know of where you get to study Ayn Rand's ideas, gain skill in how to think and how to apply those ideas, and how to communicate more effectively. So it's a unique opportunity in that respect. And I think that's part of what we're really excited about, is to find people who have that as a passion for what they do. And as you said, it's a real job. There's no fetching of coffee and donuts. It's in a different category from a lot of opportunities that are presented as, here's an internship, you'll learn X, Y, and Z, and in fact, you're stuffing envelopes or bringing coffee. All right, so let's move on to this question on what makes a good candidate. I've touched on a few aspects, but I would say 1 and 2 would be, 1, you're really passionate about understanding Ayn Rand's ideas and wanting to communicate them. Lots of people, and I'm glad, are passionate about Ayn Rand's ideas, and they want to live by those ideas, and that's wonderful. That's what I do. It's a different proposition to make that your career, educating people and advocating for those ideas. And it might seem like a subtle difference, but it's a meaningful one. But you might not know where that is, and that's the second point, is the people who are passionate about making it a career, writing and speaking and so forth, and want to try and gain first-hand knowledge to see if it is for them. So I think those are really important characteristics you need to bring. Now, obviously, there are some others, including you have to be literate, you have to be able to work in this country and so forth, and have a bachelor's degree or more. Some of these are spelled out on our website, and I would point people to AynRand.org/all one word Junior Fellows Program. But let me emphasize some of the connections between what we've talked about already as tips for people aspiring to these kinds of careers and why we brought in the Junior Fellows Program as part of this presentation. So we've said be curious, be experimental, and be ready to fail and recognize the challenges. The program in many ways is designed to foster these kinds of things. So we want people to come in seeking to grow and learn and curious already about issues. We want people coming in who are experimental, willing to put this time in to see if this is for them.
Yeah, I mean, so for instance, you mentioned the white paper on environmentalism. I mean, that person, the junior fellow coming in, was interested in environmentalist issues and the movement and so on. And then you get a specific project that directs, but it's in that area. But it's not that, well, they have no idea what they're interested in, and we kind of have to kindle and spark the interest. You have to be interested in some of these issues. Otherwise, why do you want it as a career?
Yeah, and I would say a third point of contact here is you're ready to come and take on a challenge and learn from it. And that is inherent in the career. So we've designed the program to give you that kind of opportunity.
Yeah, and to be ready to learn both positive and things you're not doing well. So you're going to get feedback in this program. And that goes to the third thing, that you have to be ready to fail. It's not going to be all failure, but it's not going to be all success either. And the feedback is a learning opportunity.
Well, thank you for joining us today. I hope you found it illuminating. And I'll close with this suggestion. So if what we've said here has been valuable to you, go ahead and pursue your career passion. If what we've said about the Junior Fellows Program is something that interests you, I invite you to apply. The application deadline is May 15th. And as I mentioned, the URL is aynrand.org/Junior Fellows Program, or you can use Google to find it as well. We look forward to hearing from you, and thank you.
Thanks.